The sound cut through the peaceful autumn afternoon like a blade through silk. Marcus Cole stood frozen on his front porch, a cold cup of coffee suspended halfway to his lips. The crying wasn't the ordinary kind, not the frustrated tears of a child denied candy at the store, or the dramatic sobs of a teenager grounded for breaking curfew. This was something deeper, something that resonated with a frequency Marcus had heard only in the most desperate corners of the world during his 22 years as a Navy SEAL. He set down his coffee mug on the weathered wooden railing and turned toward the source of the sound. It came from the Johnson house next door, a modest two-story colonial with faded blue shutters and a lawn that had seen better days. The house had been empty for nearly 3 months before the Johnsons moved in 6 weeks ago. Marcus had noticed them, a middle-aged couple, perhaps in their late 40s, and a boy who couldn't have been more than 8 or 9 years old. The boy had dark hair that fell across his forehead in uneven waves and eyes that seemed far too old for his small face. Marcus had meant to introduce himself properly, but the transition from active duty to civilian life had proven more challenging than any mission he'd ever undertaken. The quiet of suburban Cedar Ridge felt suffocating after decades of purpose-driven chaos. He spent most of his days on this porch, watching the neighborhood move through its predictable rhythms, trying to remember who he was when he wasn't defined by service. But that crying, that sound demanded attention. If you're finding value in this story, take a moment to hit that subscribe button and give this video a like. Your support helps us bring more heartfelt stories to your screen. Now, let's continue. The October wind carried a chill that bit through Marcus's flannel shirt as he stepped off the porch and crossed his neatly trimmed lawn. Fallen leaves crunched beneath his boots, the same tactical boots he'd worn on his last deployment, now relegated to yard work and solitary walks through the neighborhood. He approached the chain-link fence that separated his property from the Johnsons' backyard and peered through the metal diamonds. There, sitting beneath a massive oak tree whose branches stretched like arthritic fingers toward the grey sky, was the boy. He sat with his knees pulled tight against his chest, his thin arms wrapped around them as if he were trying to make himself as small as possible. His narrow shoulders shook with each sob, and even from 15 feet away, Marcus could see the tracks of tears glistening on his cheeks. But it was what the boy held in his hands that made Marcus's chest tighten. Torn pieces of paper, a photograph, ripped into uneven fragments. The boy tried desperately to piece them together on the grass in front of him, his small fingers trembling as he attempted to align edges that no longer matched perfectly. Marcus stood there for a long moment, wrestling with himself. In his former life, he would have known exactly what to do. There were protocols for every situation, chain of command, clear objectives. But this, a crying child and a broken photograph, there was no playbook for that. The boy looked up suddenly, as if sensing he was being watched. His eyes, deep brown, almost black, met Marcus's through the fence. They were red-rimmed and swollen, but behind the tears, Marcus recognized something he'd seen countless times in his career. The look of someone who had lost everything and was struggling to hold on to the one thing that remained. "I'm sorry," the boy said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't mean to be loud." The apology, immediate, reflexive, tinged with fear, told Marcus more about this child's history than any file or report ever could. This was a boy accustomed to apologizing for his own existence, trained by circumstance to believe his emotions were an inconvenience to others. Marcus cleared his throat. "You don't have to apologize for crying," he said, keeping his voice low and steady. "Everyone cries sometimes, even grown-ups." The boy stared at him, suspicion battling with curiosity in his young face. "You don't look like someone who cries." Marcus almost smiled at that. If this child only knew how many tears he'd swallowed over the years. Tears for fallen brothers, for innocent lives lost in crossfire, for the pieces of himself he'd left scattered across 3 continents. But he simply said, "Looks can be deceiving." The boy seemed to consider this for a moment before returning his attention to the torn photograph. His fingers moved with renewed urgency, as if Marcus's presence had reminded him of his task. "What happened to your picture?" Marcus asked, leaning against the fence. The boy's lower lip trembled. "It got ripped," he said, stating the obvious but unable to explain more. "I can see that. Was it an accident?" A long pause. The boy's hands stilled on the fragments. "Kyle said it was just paper. He said it didn't mean anything. He said I needed to stop living in the past and accept my new life." His voice cracked on the last 2 words. Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. "Who's Kyle?" "Mrs. Johnson's son from before. He's 17. He comes to visit sometimes." The boy's jaw tightened with an anger that seemed too heavy for his small frame. "He doesn't like me being here. He says I'm not really part of the family. He says I'm just temporary." Marcus had encountered men like Kyle throughout his career. Bullies who built themselves up by tearing others down, cowards who targeted those unable to defend themselves. The fact that this Kyle was a teenager targeting a foster child made Marcus's blood simmer with barely contained rage. "What's your name?" Marcus asked, deliberately shifting the conversation. "Elijah," the boy said. "Elijah Torres, but Mrs. Johnson calls me Eli." "Eli?" Marcus repeated, tasting the name. "I'm Marcus. I live next door." He gestured vaguely toward his house. "I'm your neighbor." Eli nodded, but didn't respond. His attention had returned to the photograph, and his expression had grown even more desolate. The pieces simply wouldn't fit together properly. Several small fragments had blown away in the wind, and even where edges aligned, the image remained hopelessly incomplete. "That photo," Marcus said carefully, "it's important to you." It wasn't a question, but Eli answered anyway. "It's my mom and dad, my real ones." He said the words with a defensive edge, as if expecting Marcus to argue. "Before everything happened, before they got sick, before they—" He couldn't finish the sentence. Marcus closed his eyes briefly. He understood now. This wasn't just a photograph. It was a connection to a world that no longer existed, a window into a life that had been stolen by circumstances beyond this child's control. To Kyle, it was just paper, but to Eli, it was everything. "Can I see it?" Marcus asked quietly. Eli hesitated, clutching the fragments protectively against his chest. Trust was a rare commodity for foster children, Marcus knew. They learned early that people left, promises were broken, and the only person they could truly rely on was themselves. "I won't take it," Marcus assured him. "I just want to look." After a long moment, Eli slowly extended his hands, offering the torn pieces like sacred relics. Marcus opened the gate that separated their yards. It squeaked on rusty hinges and crossed the distance between them. He lowered himself to the grass beside the boy, his knees protesting the movement. Years of jumping from helicopters and storming through hostile terrain had taken their toll on joints that weren't as young as they used to be. The photograph had been torn into at least a dozen pieces. Marcus gathered them carefully, his large hands surprisingly gentle as he turned the fragments over, examining them. When he pieced together what he could on the grass between them, he saw a young couple, a man with Eli's dark hair and a woman with kind eyes and a bright smile. They stood in front of what looked like a modest apartment building, arms wrapped around each other, radiating the kind of happiness that comes from having everything you need in the world. "They look like good people," Marcus said. Eli nodded, fresh tears spilling down his cheeks. They were the best." He wiped his nose with the back of his hand. "Everyone says I should move on. The counselor at school says I need to focus on the present, on building new relationships. The Johnsons are nice, they really are, but they're not. He trailed off, unable to complete the thought. They're not your parents, Marcus finished for him. Yeah. Eli's voice was small, defeated. And now I don't even have their picture anymore. Kyle said I was being stupid, keeping it under my pillow like a baby. He said I needed to grow up, and then he mimed the motion of tearing, and his face crumpled all over again. Marcus sat with the pieces in his hands, his mind working through possibilities. In his previous life, when something was broken, you either fixed it or you adapted. You didn't sit around mourning what was lost. You figured out what came next. Eli, he said slowly, can I take these pieces home with me? The boy's expression immediately shifted to alarm. Why? Because I think I might be able to help, but I need to look at them more closely, and I'll need some time. Eli shook his head rapidly. No, I can't. It's all I have left of them. I can't let you... I understand, Marcus said, holding up his free hand in a calming gesture. I know how important this is to you, and I promise you, on my honor as a United States Navy SEAL, that I will return this to you. Not just return it. I'll fix it, or at least I'll try my best to fix it. Eli's eyes widened at the mention of Navy SEAL. You were a SEAL, like a real one? Marcus nodded. 22 years, just retired a few months ago. The boy's gaze traveled over Marcus with new interest, taking in the broad shoulders, the thick forearms covered in faded tattoos, the quiet intensity that seemed to radiate from him like heat from an engine. Did you ever go on real missions? Quite a few. Did you ever save people? Marcus thought about the question seriously before answering. Sometimes, and sometimes, I couldn't save them. Sometimes, no matter what you do, you can't stop bad things from happening. He paused, meeting the boy's eyes. But you always try. That's the important part. You always try. Eli seemed to wrestle with something internally. Then, with the solemn gravity of someone making a life-altering decision, he nodded. Okay, you can take it, but you have to promise you'll bring it back. I promise, Marcus said, and he meant it with every fiber of his being. He gathered the fragments carefully, slipping them into the breast pocket of his flannel shirt, directly over his heart. Then he pushed himself to his feet, his knees cracking in protest. Eli, a woman's voice called from inside the house. Eli, honey, it's time for dinner. The boy wiped his face hurriedly, trying to erase the evidence of his tears. I have to go, he said. I know, we'll talk more later, okay? Eli nodded and started toward the house, but stopped after a few steps and turned back. Mr. Marcus. Just Marcus is fine. Marcus. The boy hesitated, his young face caught between hope and the fear of disappointment. Thank you for listening. Most grown-ups don't really listen. Before Marcus could respond, Eli had turned and was running toward the back door, his sneakers slapping against the concrete patio. The door swung open to reveal a woman in her late 40s with graying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She looked tired but kind, and she smiled as Eli approached. There you are, sweetheart. Wash up. Dinner's almost ready. She glanced past him toward Marcus, and her expression shifted to something more cautious. Oh, hello. Ma'am, Marcus nodded, just introducing myself to your boy. I live next door. Yes, I know. I'm Linda Johnson. My husband Dennis and I have been meaning to come over and say hello, but... She shrugged apologetically. Time gets away from us. No need to apologize. I'm Marcus Cole. Linda's eyes flickered with recognition at the name. You're the one who served overseas, aren't you? Dennis mentioned seeing a flag in your front window. That's right. Well, thank you for your service. She said it automatically, the way most people did, sincere enough but practiced. Then she looked at Eli, who was hovering just inside the doorway, and her expression softened. Eli's had a rough day. I'm glad he had someone to talk to. Marcus nodded but didn't elaborate on what they'd discussed. That was Eli's story to tell, if and when he chose to. He seems like a good kid. He is, Linda said firmly. He really is. There was something defensive in her tone, as if she was accustomed to having to justify her foster son's presence to skeptics. We're hoping to make the adoption permanent soon. He deserves stability. He deserves a real home. Marcus thought about the photograph pieces in his pocket, the real home that Eli had lost, the parents who would never see their son grow up. I'm sure you'll give him that, he said. Linda nodded, then ushered Eli inside. Nice meeting you, Mr. Cole. Don't be a stranger. The door closed, and Marcus was alone in the fading afternoon light. He stood there for a moment, feeling the weight of the torn photograph against his chest. Then he turned and walked back through the gate, across his lawn, and into his own house. The interior was Spartan. A couch, a television he rarely watched, a bookshelf filled with military history and the occasional thriller. The walls were mostly bare, save for a few framed photographs of his SEAL team and a shadow box containing his medals and commendations. There was nothing warm about the space, nothing that marked it as a home rather than a temporary shelter. Marcus sat down at his kitchen table, the same table where he'd eaten countless solitary meals since returning from his final deployment. He carefully removed the photograph fragments from his pocket and spread them across the wooden surface. Under the harsh overhead light, he could see the damage more clearly. The tear marks were jagged and cruel, evidence of deliberate destruction rather than accident. Several small pieces were missing entirely, lost to the wind or ground into the grass beneath Kyle's careless feet. For a long moment, Marcus simply stared at the ruined image. Then he pulled out his phone and began searching. The next morning dawned grey and cold, with a mist that clung to the ground like a living thing. Marcus was already awake. He hadn't slept much, but that was nothing new. Insomnia had been his constant companion since returning to civilian life, the silence of the suburbs, somehow more oppressive than the chaos of combat zones. He'd spent most of the night researching photo restoration services, digital repair techniques, and alternatives for preserving damaged images. What he'd found had been simultaneously encouraging and daunting. There were professionals who could work miracles with damaged photographs, using digital technology to fill in missing pieces, restore faded colors, and bring clarity to images that seemed hopelessly compromised. But these services were expensive, some charging hundreds or even thousands of dollars, and they required time Marcus suspected Eli didn't have. The boy needed hope now. He needed something to hold on to. Marcus had another idea, but it would require resources he hadn't accessed in years. He picked up his phone and scrolled through his contacts until he found the name he was looking for: Chief Petty Officer James Benny Bennett. They'd served together for nearly 15 years, until Benny took a piece of shrapnel to his leg in Afghanistan and was medically discharged. Now he ran a small graphic design business out of his home in New Jersey, creating logos and marketing materials for local businesses. But before the Navy, Benny had studied fine arts at NYU, specializing in photography and digital imaging. The phone rang 3 times before a familiar voice answered. Marcus Cole. I was starting to think you'd dropped off the face of the earth. Something like that, Marcus admitted. How are you, Benny? Can't complain. Well, I can, but nobody wants to hear it. Legs acting up with this weather. Karen's driving me crazy about the gutters, and my youngest just announced she wants to be a TikTok star instead of going to college. So, living the dream. Despite his words, there was warmth in Benny's voice. What about you? You settling into retirement okay? Marcus hesitated. That's actually why I'm calling. I need a favor. Name it. And Marcus did. He explained about Eli, about the torn photograph, about the cruel actions of a teenage bully who didn't understand or didn't care what he'd destroyed. As he spoke, he could hear Benny's breathing change, growing heavier with each detail. "That's rough," Benny said when Marcus finished. "Poor kid. Losing your parents and then having some punk destroy the only photo you have of them. That's just—" He exhaled sharply. "That's evil, is what it is." "I need to fix it," Marcus said. "Or at least try. I've got most of the pieces, but some are missing. Can you work with that?" "Send me what you've got. High-resolution scans if you can manage it. I'll see what I can do." "What's it going to cost me?" Benny was silent for a moment. "Brother, for something like this, it's going to cost you exactly nothing. Consider it my good deed for the month, or the year. Whatever." Marcus felt something loosen in his chest. "Thank you, Benny." "Don't thank me yet. I haven't seen what we're working with, but I'll do my best. That's all any of us can do, right? Our best." After hanging up, Marcus spent the next hour carefully scanning each photograph fragment, using the all-in-one printer he'd bought when he moved in and had never used until now. The pieces were fragile, some no larger than a thumbnail, and he handled them with the same care he would have given to sensitive intelligence materials. When he was finished, he had a digital collection of 13 separate images, each showing a different portion of the original photograph. He emailed the files to Benny with a detailed description of what the complete image should look like, based on what he'd observed when he pieced it together on the grass. Then he sat back and waited. But waiting had never been Marcus's strong suit. In the service, waiting meant preparation, checking equipment, reviewing intelligence, running scenarios. Here, in this silent house, waiting just meant thinking. And thinking, these days, was a dangerous activity. His mind drifted to his own childhood, growing up in a cramped apartment in South Boston, with a mother who worked double shifts at the hospital and a father who'd left when Marcus was 4. He remembered the photograph his mother kept on the mantel, a wedding portrait yellowed with age, showing a young couple who looked nothing like the bitter, broken people they would become. His mother had treasured that photograph, not because she still loved his father, she didn't, but because it represented a moment of pure possibility, a time before life had systematically dismantled her dreams. Marcus understood, perhaps better than most, the weight that a single photograph could carry. That evening, he sat at his kitchen table with the photograph fragments spread before him like pieces of a puzzle that held someone's entire world. The overhead light cast harsh shadows across the torn edges, highlighting the violence that had been done to this precious memento. Marcus traced the outline of the mother's face with his fingertip, noting how her smile seemed to light up even this damaged image. He thought about Eli, alone in his room at the Johnson house, probably lying awake and staring at the ceiling. The boy had trusted a stranger with the most valuable thing he possessed. That kind of trust wasn't given lightly. Marcus knew that from experience. In his career, trust was earned through blood and sacrifice, through shared danger and unwavering loyalty. What had he done to earn Eli's trust? He'd simply stopped and listened. Maybe that was enough. Maybe in a world that moved too fast and cared too little, simply paying attention was the most radical act of all. Marcus pulled out a notebook and began making notes. Photo restoration services, digital repair options, contacts from his military days who might have access to advanced imaging technology. He worked until his eyes burned and his handwriting became illegible, then fell asleep at the table with his head resting on his arms, the photograph fragments still carefully arranged beside him. He dreamed of his mother's wedding portrait, the one that had hung on their mantel throughout his childhood. In the dream, the photograph was whole and vibrant, but as he watched, cracks began to spread across its surface, fracturing the young couple into 1,000 fragments. He reached out to stop the destruction, but his hands passed through the image like smoke. He woke with a start, the grey light of dawn filtering through his kitchen window. He was pulled from his reverie by a knock at his door. Through the window, he could see Linda Johnson standing on his porch, her coat pulled tight against the cold, her expression uncertain. He opened the door. "Mrs. Johnson." "Mr. Cole," she gave him a thin smile. "I hope I'm not disturbing you." "Not at all. Is everything okay?" Linda hesitated, wrapping her arms around herself. "I wanted to thank you for talking to Eli yesterday. He wouldn't tell me exactly what happened, but I know it had something to do with Kyle's visit." Her jaw tightened at the mention of the name. "Kyle can be difficult. He doesn't adjust well to change, and having Eli in the house represents a lot of change." Marcus nodded, keeping his expression neutral. "I gathered as much." "The thing is," Linda continued, "Eli seems different since yesterday, less withdrawn, maybe. When I asked him what you two talked about, he just said you were going to help him with something." She looked at Marcus with a mixture of curiosity and hope. "I don't know what that means, but if you can help him, if you can reach him in a way we haven't been able to—" She trailed off, shaking her head. "I'm sorry. I'm probably being ridiculous. We barely know each other." "Mrs. Johnson," Marcus said slowly, "how much do you know about Eli's life before he came to you?" Linda's expression grew somber. "Some. His file tells us that his parents died of carbon monoxide poisoning when he was 6. A faulty heater in their apartment. Eli was at a sleepover that night, or he would have—" She couldn't finish the sentence. "He spent 2 years bouncing between foster homes before he came to us. Some of those homes were good. Some were—" She looked away. "Not so good." Marcus absorbed this information, adding it to what he already knew. 2 years of instability, of never knowing if he would be wanted or discarded. 2 years of learning that love was conditional and security was an illusion. And through it all, one photograph, a single, fragile connection to the life that had been stolen from him. "He's a resilient kid," Marcus said, "stronger than he knows." "He is," Linda agreed. "But strength isn't always enough. Sometimes you need someone to believe in you, someone to show you that you matter." She met his eyes directly. "I don't know what you did yesterday, Mr. Cole, but I haven't seen Eli smile since Kyle's visit. This morning at breakfast he smiled. It was small, just a little quirk of his lips, but it was there. And I have a feeling it had something to do with you." Before Marcus could respond, a car pulled into the Johnsons' driveway, a silver sedan that had seen better days. A heavy-set man in his early 50s emerged, carrying a briefcase and a paper bag that presumably contained his lunch. Dennis Johnson, Marcus assumed. Linda's husband. "That's my cue," Linda said. "Dennis doesn't like his dinner to be late." She turned to leave, then paused. "Mr. Cole, whatever you're doing for Eli, thank you. Even if it doesn't work out the way you hope, thank you for trying. That's more than most people would do." She walked away, leaving Marcus alone on his porch with a growing weight of responsibility on his shoulders. He watched the Johnsons' door close behind her, then retreated inside his own house to check his email. 2 days passed before Benny called back. 2 days, during which Marcus saw Eli only once, through the fence, as the boy walked to the school bus with his backpack hanging from one shoulder. Their eyes met briefly, and Eli gave a small wave before climbing aboard. Marcus returned the gesture, silently renewing his promise to the boy. When his phone finally rang, Marcus answered before the second ring. "Tell me you have good news." "I have news," Benny said carefully. "Whether it's good or not depends on your perspective." Marcus's heart sank. "That doesn't sound promising." "Just hear me out. The damage to the photo is extensive. Some of those missing pieces contained crucial details, part of the mother's face, part of the building in the background. I've done what I can with digital reconstruction, using AI upscaling and manual touch-up, but—" He paused. Look, the technology can do amazing things these days, but it can't create something from nothing. The restored image is good, maybe 80% accurate, but it's not perfect. There are areas where I had to guess, where I had to extrapolate based on what the surrounding pixels suggested. It looks real, but anyone who knew the original would notice differences. Marcus processed this information. 80%. That meant 20% of the image would be approximation, reconstruction, digital guesswork. Would Eli accept an imperfect restoration of his only connection to his parents? Or would the differences, the subtle wrongness of digitally reconstructed features, make the loss even more painful? "Send me what you have," Marcus said. "I'll make the call." "Already in your inbox. And Marcus, for what it's worth, I think you should show him. Even if it's not perfect, it's something. It shows that someone cared enough to try. Sometimes that matters more than the result." Marcus thanked his friend and ended the call. Then, with a knot of anticipation in his stomach, he opened his email and downloaded the attached file. The image that filled his screen took his breath away. Benny had worked magic. The restored photograph showed a young couple standing in front of an apartment building, just as Marcus remembered from the torn pieces. But now, instead of jagged edges and missing sections, the image was whole. The man's dark hair, so like Eli's, was swept back from a face that radiated quiet pride. His arm was wrapped around a woman whose smile seemed to light up the entire frame. She had kind eyes, the kind that crinkled at the corners when she laughed. Between them, there was a sense of togetherness, of unity, of love so palpable that it seemed to reach through the screen. Were there imperfections? Yes, if Marcus looked closely. The texture on part of the mother's cheek seemed slightly off. A section of the building in the background had an artificial quality, like a video game render rather than a real structure. But these were minor flaws, visible only under intense scrutiny. The overall effect was powerful. A window into a happier time, a memory preserved against all odds. Marcus printed the image on the highest quality paper his printer could handle. Then he went online and ordered a simple wooden frame. Nothing fancy, just something sturdy that would protect the photograph for years to come. Overnight shipping. It would arrive tomorrow. That night, Marcus slept better than he had in months. The frame arrived the next afternoon, and Marcus spent a careful hour assembling it, placing the restored photograph inside, and wrapping the entire thing in brown paper. He considered what to write on a card, settling eventually on simple words. For Eli, because everyone deserves to remember where they came from. Marcus. The afternoon sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon when Marcus walked across his lawn and knocked on the Johnsons' door. Linda answered, her expression shifting from surprise to something warmer when she saw who it was. "Mr. Cole, this is unexpected. Is Eli home? I have something for him." Linda's eyes dropped to the wrapped package in Marcus's hands. "He's in his room. Homework." She hesitated, then stepped aside. "Come in." The Johnson house was warm and cluttered in a way that spoke of active living rather than neglect. Children's artwork hung on the walls, some clearly made by younger hands, probably from Eli's early foster years, alongside family photographs and motivational quotes in decorative frames. The smell of something savory drifted from the kitchen, and Marcus could hear the low murmur of a television from somewhere deeper in the house. "Eli's room is upstairs," Linda said. "Second door on the left, but Mr. Cole—" She caught his arm gently as he moved toward the stairs. "What's in the package?" Marcus met her eyes, a promise kept. Something in his expression must have conveyed the significance of the moment, because Linda nodded slowly and released his arm. "Go on, then. I'll give you some privacy." The stairs creaked beneath Marcus's weight as he climbed to the second floor. The hallway was narrow, lined with more photographs and a few closed doors. He found the second door on the left, slightly ajar, and through the gap he could see Eli sitting at a small desk, hunched over a textbook. Marcus knocked softly. "Eli, it's Marcus." The boy's head snapped up, his eyes widening. "Marcus!" He scrambled off his chair and pulled the door open fully. "You came back. I knew you would. I told Mrs. Johnson, but she wasn't sure. She thought maybe you were just being nice, but I knew—" "Easy," Marcus said, a rare smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Take a breath." Eli caught himself mid-ramble, his cheeks flushing slightly. "Sorry, I've been waiting. Every day I watched through my window to see if you were coming. And now you're here." His eyes dropped to the package. Is that what I think it is?" Instead of answering, Marcus held out the wrapped frame. "Why don't you open it and find out?" Eli took the package with trembling hands. For a moment, he just held it as if afraid to discover what was inside. Then, with painstaking care, he peeled back the brown paper to reveal the wooden frame beneath. When he saw the photograph, his entire body went still. For a long moment, Eli simply stared at the image, his breath coming in short, rapid bursts. His hands trembled so violently that Marcus worried he might drop the frame. The boy's eyes moved slowly across the restored photograph, taking in every detail. The way his father's arm wrapped protectively around his mother's waist, the exact shade of his mother's hair in the afternoon light, the weathered brick of the apartment building that had been his first home. "That's my dad's favorite shirt," Eli whispered, his voice barely audible. "The blue one with the buttons. He wore it every Sunday. Mom always said it made his eyes look like the ocean." Marcus felt his own eyes sting at the observation. Such a small detail. But Eli had remembered. He had carried that memory for years, holding it close against the current of time and loss that had tried to wash it away. "And Mom's necklace," Eli continued, leaning closer to examine the image. "See, the little gold star? She told me once that Dad gave it to her when they got engaged. She never took it off. Not ever." His voice cracked. "I used to play with it when I was little, when she would hold me." Marcus watched as fresh tears began to spill down Eli's cheeks, but these were different from the tears he had witnessed in the backyard. These were tears of overwhelming gratitude, of a wound being tended after too long left to fester. That's them," Eli whispered. "That's really them. But how? It was ripped. It was destroyed. How did you—" "I have a friend," Marcus said. "A very talented friend who knows how to fix things. He couldn't make it perfect. Some parts had to be reconstructed, but he did his best. We both did our best." Eli clutched the frame against his chest, just as he had clutched the torn pieces that afternoon in the backyard. But this time, his grip wasn't desperate. It was protective, the grip of someone holding on to something precious, something they never thought they'd have again. "Thank you," the boy said, his voice cracking. "Thank you, thank you, thank you." And then, before Marcus could prepare himself, Eli threw himself forward and wrapped his arms around Marcus's waist. The embrace was fierce and sudden, catching Marcus off guard. He stood frozen for a moment, his arms hanging awkwardly at his sides. Human contact had become foreign to him over the years. In the military there was camaraderie, but it expressed itself in handshakes and backslaps, not embraces. This was something else entirely. Slowly, carefully, Marcus lowered his hands and placed them on the boy's trembling shoulders. "You're welcome, Eli," he said softly. "You're welcome." They stood like that for a long moment, the afternoon light filtering through the window and casting golden patterns on the walls. When Eli finally pulled back, his eyes were still wet, but there was a brightness in them that hadn't been there before, a flicker of something that might have been hope. "Can I show Mrs. Johnson?" he asked. Marcus nodded. "It's yours. You can show whoever you want." Eli clutched the frame again and darted past Marcus into the hallway. His feet pounded down the stairs, and Marcus could hear his excited voice rising up from below. "Mrs. Johnson! Mrs. Johnson! Look what Marcus did!" Marcus descended the stairs slowly, giving the family their moment. When he reached the living room, he found Linda holding the frame, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. Dennis had emerged from wherever he'd been, standing beside his wife, with an expression of quiet bewilderment. And Eli was bouncing on his toes between them, his earlier reserve completely forgotten. "Mr. Cole," Linda said, her voice thick with emotion, "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything. But this must have cost the effort alone." She shook her head, unable to complete her thoughts. "Why? Why would you do this for a boy you barely know?" Marcus considered the question. The honest answer was complex, tied to his own childhood, his own losses, his desperate search for purpose in a world that no longer seemed to need him. But all of that felt too heavy for this moment, too dark for the light that had entered this room. So instead he said simply, "Because someone once told me that you always try. Even when you can't fix everything, you always try. That's the important part." Eli beamed up at him, and Marcus felt something shift inside his chest, something frozen beginning to thaw. Dennis stepped forward and extended his hand. "Dennis Johnson," he said, "I don't think we've been formally introduced." Marcus shook the offered hand. "Marcus Cole." "Well, Marcus Cole, you've made quite an impression on our boy here." Dennis's grip was firm, his gaze appraising but not unfriendly. "I understand you're ex-military?" "Navy SEAL, 22 years. Dennis nodded slowly, processing this information. "That's a long time to serve. Bet civilian life feels pretty different." "You could say that." There was a moment of silence, during which Linda seemed to make a decision. "Mr. Cole, Marcus, would you like to stay for dinner? It's nothing fancy, just pot roast and vegetables, but there's plenty to go around." Marcus's first instinct was to decline. He'd become comfortable with his solitude, accustomed to the quiet of his empty house and his solitary meals. But then he looked at Eli, still clutching the framed photograph as if it might disappear, and something in him yielded. "I'd like that," he said. "Thank you." Dinner at the Johnson household was an experience unlike anything in Marcus's recent memory. The conversation flowed easily, punctuated by Eli's excited interjections and Linda's patient redirections. Dennis turned out to be a surprisingly good storyteller, regaling them with tales from his job as a hospital administrator. Sanitized versions, clearly appropriate for young ears, but entertaining nonetheless. And Eli was transformed. The reserved, wounded child Marcus had first observed was nowhere to be seen. In his place was a boy who laughed freely, who contributed to the conversation, who reached for seconds without hesitation. Every few minutes his eyes would drift to the framed photograph, now propped against the centerpiece where everyone could see it, and his smile would deepen. "Marcus," Eli said suddenly, "will you teach me things?" The table went quiet. Linda and Dennis exchanged a look that Marcus couldn't quite interpret. "What kind of things?" Marcus asked carefully. "Important things, like how to be brave and strong, and how to help people like you helped me." Eli's eyes were earnest, almost pleading. "I want to be like you when I grow up. I want to fix things for people." Marcus felt a lump form in his throat. He thought about all the things he'd seen in his career, all the darkness and violence and loss. He thought about the parts of himself that had calcified over the years, the emotional walls he'd built to survive impossible situations. Was he really someone this boy should aspire to become? But then he thought about the photograph, about the promise he'd made and kept, about the tears of gratitude that had spilled down Eli's cheeks. Maybe there was more to him than the soldier, more than the sum of his experiences. Maybe there was still something worth offering. "Tell you what," Marcus said, "I'm not sure I'm the best person to teach you about being brave or strong. I'm still figuring that stuff out myself. But I can teach you some other things, practical things, like how to handle yourself in difficult situations, how to think clearly when everything seems chaotic, how to take care of yourself and the people you love. Eli's face lit up. Really, you'd do that? If your parents approve. Marcus looked at Linda and Dennis, seeking permission. Linda's eyes were soft. I think that would be wonderful. Agreed, Dennis added. Every boy needs a mentor, and from what I've seen, you might just be exactly what Eli needs. What began that evening over pot roast evolved into something neither Marcus nor Eli had anticipated. 3 times a week, after Eli finished his homework, he would come to Marcus's house for what they called training sessions. But these sessions looked nothing like military drills. Instead, they were lessons in life, the kind of lessons that couldn't be found in textbooks or taught in classrooms. The first session focused on breathing. Marcus sat Eli down on the back porch and taught him the same box breathing technique that Navy SEALs used to remain calm under extreme pressure. 4 seconds in, hold for 4, 4 seconds out, hold for 4. They practiced until Eli could do it automatically, until his small shoulders visibly relaxed with each exhale. When you feel angry or scared, Marcus explained, your body thinks it's in danger. Your heart races, your muscles tense up, your thinking gets cloudy. This breathing tells your body that you're safe, that you're in control. It gives you space to think before you react. Eli practiced diligently, and within a few weeks, Linda reported that he'd used the technique to calm himself during a difficult moment at school. A classmate had made a cruel comment about foster kids, and instead of lashing out or retreating into himself, Eli had taken a breath, responded calmly, and walked away with his dignity intact. Marcus taught Eli how to identify and manage his emotions, drawing on the mental resilience techniques he'd learned during his SEAL training. They practiced breathing exercises for when anger or fear threatened to overwhelm him. They discussed scenarios and talked through how to handle difficult people, bullies like Kyle, skeptics who would doubt his worth, strangers who might wish him harm. They also worked on situational awareness, a skill that Marcus had relied on throughout his career. He taught Eli to notice details that others overlooked, the way someone's body language could reveal their intentions, the importance of knowing exits and escape routes, how to trust your instincts when something felt wrong. These weren't lessons born of paranoia, but of preparedness. Marcus wanted Eli to feel capable and confident, to know that he had the tools to protect himself in a world that wasn't always kind. But it wasn't all serious. Marcus also taught Eli how to throw a football with a proper spiral, how to change a tire, how to cook a simple meal without burning down the kitchen. They worked on a model airplane together, spending patient hours assembling tiny pieces and painting details. They took walks through the neighborhood, Marcus pointing out things that most people overlooked, the way certain birds signaled approaching weather, the subtle signs that indicated whether a house was occupied or empty, the rhythms of the community that revealed themselves only to careful observers. For Marcus, these sessions became the anchor he hadn't known he needed. The silence of his house no longer felt oppressive when he knew Eli would be knocking on his door soon. The purposelessness that had plagued him since retirement began to recede, replaced by a new kind of mission, one that didn't involve weapons or enemies, but something far more challenging and far more rewarding. Eli flourished under the attention. His grades improved. His teachers reported that he was more engaged, more confident, more willing to participate in class discussions. Linda shared that his nightmares, once a nightly occurrence, had become rare. He was sleeping better, eating better, smiling more. But life, Marcus knew, was never so simple. The trouble started about 2 months into their arrangement. Marcus was walking to his mailbox when he noticed a figure standing on the Johnsons' porch. It was a teenager, tall and broad-shouldered, with the kind of swagger that masked deep insecurity. Kyle. Marcus recognized him from Eli's descriptions, though they'd never formally met. Kyle was watching Marcus with an expression that blended curiosity and contempt. "You're the seal, right? The one who's been hanging around my mum's house." Marcus retrieved his mail without hurrying. "That's right, and you must be Kyle. My mom told me about you. Says you've been spending a lot of time with the foster kid." Kyle said the last two words with undisguised disdain. "Playing hero, are we?" Marcus turned to face the teenager fully. He kept his voice calm, his posture relaxed. "I'm a neighbor. I spend time with Eli because I enjoy his company. That's all." "Right." Kyle descended the porch steps and crossed the lawn until he was just a few feet from Marcus. He was trying to be intimidating, Marcus realized, using his height and bulk to establish dominance. It might have worked on someone else. "You know what I think? I think you should mind your own business. That kid has plenty of people looking after him. He doesn't need some washed-up soldier playing daddy." Marcus felt a familiar coldness settle into his bones, the same cold detachment that had served him well in countless confrontations. But this wasn't a combat zone, and this wasn't an enemy combatant. This was a 17-year-old boy with too much anger and not enough direction. "Kyle," Marcus said evenly, "I understand that Eli's presence in your family has been an adjustment. Change is hard, especially when it's not something you chose. But taking out your frustration on a child who's already lost everything, that's not strength. That's weakness. And I think deep down you know that." Kyle's face flushed. "You don't know anything about me." "You're right, I don't. But I know the kind of man you're in danger of becoming, and I know you don't want that. Not really." Marcus held the teenager's gaze without flinching. "You ripped up that photograph because you thought it would hurt Eli. And it did hurt him, more than you can imagine. But here's the thing, Kyle. Hurting others doesn't fill the emptiness inside you. It just deepens it. Trust me on that." For a moment, something flickered in Kyle's eyes. Uncertainty, maybe even shame. But then the walls went back up, and his expression hardened. "Whatever. Just stay away from me." He stalked back toward the house, slamming the door behind him. Marcus watched him go, then turned and walked back to his own house, the mail clutched in his hand. That night, Marcus lay awake in his bed, staring at the ceiling and thinking about Kyle. The teenager was clearly struggling. Probably had been for years, long before Eli entered the picture. The divorce between his parents, the introduction of a foster child, the upheaval of his family structure. It was a lot for anyone to process, let alone a teenager with underdeveloped coping mechanisms. Marcus had seen this pattern before in different contexts. Young men who lashed out because they didn't know how else to express their pain. Soldiers who turned bitter and cruel because tenderness felt like weakness. Anger was easier than sadness. Cruelty was easier than vulnerability. He thought about reaching out to Kyle, about trying to extend the same support he'd given Eli, but he knew it wouldn't work. Not yet. Kyle wasn't ready to accept help, especially not from someone he saw as an intruder. That door would have to open from the inside. In the meantime, Marcus would keep his promise to Eli. He would continue to be present, to teach, to support. And he would remain watchful, because he knew that Kyle's resentment wasn't likely to fade on its own. His instincts, honed over 2 decades of high-stakes operations, proved correct. It happened on a Saturday afternoon in early December. Marcus was in his garage, working on an old motorcycle he'd been restoring as a hobby project. The rhythmic work of tightening bolts and cleaning components had become a form of meditation, a way to occupy his hands while his mind wandered. He heard the commotion before he saw it, raised voices, the sound of something being knocked over, and then Eli's voice, high and frightened, calling for help. Marcus was out of his garage and across the lawn before he'd fully registered the decision to move. His body fell back on old instincts, years of training taking over as his mind assessed the situation. In the Johnsons' backyard, Kyle had Eli pinned against the fence. The older boy's face was twisted with rage, his hands gripping Eli's shirt collar, lifting the smaller boy until his feet barely touched the ground. "I told you to stay out of my room," Kyle shouted. "I told you 100 times. You think because you have that old man in your corner, you can do whatever you want? You think you're part of this family now? You're not. You're nothing. You'll never be anything." Eli was trying not to cry. Marcus could see that. The boy's jaw was clenched, his eyes blinking rapidly against the tears that threatened to spill. But he was terrified. His body was trembling, and his hands were clutching uselessly at Kyle's wrists. Marcus didn't shout. He didn't threaten. He simply walked up to the two boys and placed one hand on Kyle's shoulder. The grip wasn't painful, but it was firm. Firm enough to communicate that compliance wasn't optional. "Let him go," Marcus said. His voice was quiet, almost conversational, but there was iron beneath the velvet. Kyle's head whipped around, his eyes widening when he saw who was standing beside him. "This isn't your business." "I said let him go." Something in Marcus's tone must have penetrated, because Kyle's grip loosened. Eli dropped to the ground, stumbling slightly before regaining his balance. He immediately moved to Marcus's side, pressing close as if seeking shelter. Marcus kept his hand on Kyle's shoulder, maintaining the connection even as the teenager tried to pull away. "Walk with me," he said. It wasn't a request. "I don't have to—" "Kyle!" Marcus's voice didn't rise, but it somehow became more present, more commanding. "Walk with me, now!" The teenager's resistance crumbled. Whether it was the authority in Marcus's voice or something else entirely, he allowed himself to be guided away from the fence, away from Eli, toward the far corner of the yard where an old swing set sat rusting in the winter grass. Marcus released Kyle's shoulder and sat down on one of the swings. The chains creaked under his weight but held. He gestured to the swing beside him. Kyle stood frozen for a moment, clearly uncertain what to make of this development. Then slowly he sat. They swung in silence for a while, Marcus pushing himself gently back and forth, Kyle rigid and motionless. In the distance, Marcus could see Eli watching from near the house, his small figure tense with concern. "You want to tell me what that was about?" Marcus asked finally. Kyle's jaw tightened. "He was in my room, going through my stuff. And that justifies physical violence, pinning a 9-year-old against a fence." "You don't understand." "Help me understand." Kyle looked at Marcus sharply, as if searching for mockery or condescension. Finding neither, his expression faltered. He found something I didn't want anyone to see." "What did he find?" A long pause. Kyle's hands gripped the chains of his swing until his knuckles went white. "A letter from my dad. He wrote it before he left. I've been carrying it around for years, and Eli found it and started reading it, and I just—" He trailed off, his voice cracking slightly. "I just lost it." Marcus nodded slowly, absorbing this information. "That letter is important to you." "It's the only thing I have from him, the only proof that he—" Kyle stopped, swallowed hard. "That he loved me, before everything went wrong." And there it was, the core of Kyle's rage, laid bare. He wasn't angry at Eli, not really. He was angry at a father who had abandoned him, at a life that had spun out of control, at his own helplessness in the face of circumstances he couldn't change. Eli was simply the easiest target, the most vulnerable outlet for feelings Kyle didn't know how to process. "You know something interesting," Marcus said, staring out at the gray winter sky. "Eli has a photograph of his parents. It's the only thing he has left of them, too." Kyle's head turned sharply. "What?" "His parents died when he was 6. Carbon monoxide poisoning. That photograph, the one you ripped apart, was the only image he had of them. His only proof that they existed, that they loved him." The color drained from Kyle's face. I didn't know." "I know you didn't, But here's the thing, Kyle. You and Eli aren't so different. You've both lost something precious. You've both been carrying pain that most people can't imagine. The difference is that Eli has found a way to reach out, to connect with others, to let people help him. You've chosen anger instead. Kyle stared at the ground, his shoulders slumped. I don't know how to do anything else, he admitted quietly. Being angry it's easier. It doesn't hurt as much as being sad. Marcus remembered having almost exactly that thought earlier. I know, believe me, I know, but the thing about anger is that it's like acid. The longer you hold on to it, the more it burns, and it burns you more than anyone else. What am I supposed to do? Just pretend everything's okay? Just accept that my dad's gone and my mom has a new family, and I'm supposed to be happy about it? No one's asking you to be happy, and no one's asking you to pretend. What I'm suggesting is that you find a healthier way to deal with your pain. Marcus paused, choosing his next words carefully. Have you ever talked to anyone about how you feel? A counselor? A therapist? Anyone? Kyle snorted. My mom tried to make me go to some shrink after the divorce. I went twice and told her I wasn't going back. Why? Because he wanted me to talk about my feelings, and I don't want to talk about my feelings. I don't want to sit in some office and cry and be told it's okay to hurt. I want to... He stopped, frustration evident in every line of his body. You want to fix it, Marcus supplied. You want someone to give you a solution, a way to make the pain stop. Kyle nodded miserably. I hate to tell you this, but there's no quick fix. The only way out of pain is through it. You have to let yourself feel it, process it, and eventually learn to live with it. It never goes away completely, not really, but it does get more manageable over time. Marcus looked at the teenager directly. I'm 63 years old. I've lost more friends than I can count. I've done things that keep me awake at night even now, and the only reason I'm still standing is because I found people I could trust. People who let me be weak when I needed to be weak. Kyle was silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was small, younger than his 17 years. I don't have anyone like that. You could, if you let yourself. Marcus stood up from the swing. I'm not going to force you to do anything, Kyle. But if you ever want to talk, really talk, you know where I live. My door is open. He started to walk away, then stopped and looked back over his shoulder. One more thing. You owe Eli an apology. A real one, not just words. Think about that. Marcus walked back to where Eli was waiting, the boy's face etched with worry. Is Kyle okay? Eli asked, surprising Marcus with his concern for his tormentor. He will be, Marcus said, eventually. He walked Eli inside and stayed until Linda came home from running errands. He explained what had happened in broad strokes, leaving out Kyle's confession about the letter, but making clear that the situation had been addressed. Linda listened with a mixture of gratitude and exhaustion, and Marcus could see the toll that navigating between her biological son and her foster son was taking on her. Before he left, Eli tugged on his sleeve. Marcus, do you think Kyle will ever like me? Marcus crouched down to meet the boy's eyes. I don't know. That's up to Kyle. But I do know that you don't need his approval to be valuable. You're already valuable, just as you are. Don't ever forget that. Eli nodded solemnly, then threw his arms around Marcus in one of the fierce hugs that Marcus had grown to anticipate. Thanks, Marcus, for everything. Marcus hugged him back, no longer hesitating. Always. The weeks that followed were complicated. Kyle kept his distance from both Marcus and Eli, barely emerging from his room when he visited his mother's house. Linda reported that he'd been quieter lately, less hostile, but also less present. She didn't know if that was progress or just a different kind of retreat. Then, a few days before Christmas, Marcus found an envelope in his mailbox. Inside was a folded piece of notebook paper covered in cramped, uncertain handwriting. Mr. Cole, it began, I've been thinking about what you said. about anger being like acid. I think you're right. I've been holding on to so much anger for so long that I don't even know who I am without it. But I'm starting to think that maybe that's the problem. I talked to my mom, really talked for the first time in years. She cried a lot. I cried too, even though I tried not to. She's going to help me find a therapist, not the same one as before. Someone new. I also want to apologize to Eli. I know I hurt him, not just that one time, but every time I made him feel like he didn't belong. He doesn't deserve that. Nobody deserves that. I'm not ready to talk to you face to face yet. I don't know if I ever will be, but I wanted you to know that I heard you, that what you said mattered. Thanks for not giving up on me.
Kyle.
Marcus read the letter 3 times before folding it carefully and placing it back in the envelope. Then he sat down on his porch steps, despite the cold, and let himself feel something he hadn't felt in a very long time. Hope. Christmas at the Johnson household was unlike any Marcus had experienced. Linda had insisted he join them, and Marcus, who had planned to spend the day alone with a book and maybe some whiskey, found himself unable to refuse. The morning began with a phone call from Linda at 7 o'clock, her voice bright, with barely contained excitement. "We're starting breakfast soon," she said. "Dennis is making his famous cinnamon rolls, and Eli has been up since 5 asking when you're coming over. Get dressed and get over here." Marcus smiled despite himself. There was something infectious about Linda's enthusiasm, something that made it impossible to say no. He showered quickly, put on his best button-down shirt, a deep blue that he'd been told brought out his eyes, and walked across the frost-covered lawn to the Johnsons' front door. Eli answered before he could even knock, his face split wide with a grin that seemed to radiate pure joy. "You came! I knew you would come!" The house was transformed. Lights twinkled from every surface, a tree dominated one corner of the living room, and the smell of cinnamon and roasting meat filled the air. Garlands of holly and pine wound along the banister, and stockings hung from the fireplace mantel. 5 of them now, Marcus noticed, including one with his name stitched in red thread. "Linda's doing," Dennis explained when he caught Marcus staring at the stocking. "She added it last week, said any family of Eli's is family of ours." The words hit Marcus harder than he expected. Family. When was the last time he'd been part of a family? His mother had died during his 3rd deployment, and he'd had no siblings, no wife, no children. His team had been his family for 22 years, but they had scattered after retirement, each man finding his own path back to civilian life. Marcus had been so focused on the mission for so long that he'd forgotten what it felt like to belong somewhere, to have people who expected him to show up. Dennis was in the kitchen, wearing an apron that read, "Kiss the cook," and arguing good-naturedly with Linda about the proper way to baste a turkey. Eli ran from room to room, unable to contain his excitement, periodically stopping to show Marcus some decoration or ornament that held special significance. And Kyle was there. He'd arrived earlier that morning, Linda had explained, showing up unannounced at the door with a small wrapped package in his hands. He'd asked if he could stay for Christmas, and of course, Linda had said yes. When Marcus entered the living room, Kyle was sitting in an armchair near the tree, looking uncomfortable but determined. Their eyes met, and something passed between them. An acknowledgement, perhaps, or a silent thank you. Then Kyle stood up and walked over to where Eli was arranging presents under the tree. Marcus watched, tensing slightly, ready to intervene if necessary. "Hey," Kyle said, his voice rough. "Eli." The boy looked up, his expression guarded but curious. "Yeah?" Kyle held out the wrapped package he'd brought. "This is for you. I wanted to say I'm sorry for everything. For the picture, for the mean things I said, for—" He trailed off, seeming to struggle with the weight of his own words. "I was wrong. I was really wrong. And I know saying sorry doesn't fix anything, but I needed you to know." Eli took the package slowly. He looked at Kyle, then at the gift, then back at Kyle. "What is it?" "Open it." The wrapping paper came off to reveal a picture frame, simpler than the one Marcus had given Eli, but carefully chosen. Inside the frame was a photograph of Kyle and his father, taken years ago from the look of it. Kyle's hair was shorter, his face softer and more open. He was laughing at something off camera, while his father smiled down at him with obvious love. "I wanted you to have this," Kyle said quietly, "because I know what it's like to lose people, and I know that having a picture of them, it helps. It helps a lot." He swallowed hard. "I'm not giving you my dad's letter, that's mine. But I thought maybe, if you had a picture too, maybe you'd understand that I get it now. What you lost, what that photograph meant to you." Eli stared at the picture for a long moment. Then, to everyone's surprise, he set it carefully aside and stepped forward to wrap his arms around Kyle's waist. Kyle stood frozen, much as Marcus had that first time Eli had hugged him. But after a moment, his arms came up and he hugged the younger boy back, his eyes squeezed shut against the tears that threatened to fall. "Thank you," Eli said, his voice muffled against Kyle's shirt. "And it's okay, I forgive you." Marcus watched the scene unfold, his throat tight with emotion. Across the room, Linda had her hands pressed against her mouth, tears streaming freely down her cheeks. Dennis had emerged from the kitchen, turkey baster still in hand, his expression one of stunned wonder. This, Marcus thought, this was what it meant to restore something broken, not just photographs or relationships, but people, hearts, possibilities. Later, after the turkey had been carved and the presents opened and the day had settled into the comfortable exhaustion of celebration, Marcus found himself alone on the Johnsons' back porch. The stars were out, impossibly bright against the winter sky, and his breath misted in the cold air. The door opened behind him and Eli appeared, wrapped in a new sweater and clutching a mug of hot chocolate. He came to stand beside Marcus, pressing close for warmth. "It's a good Christmas," the boy said. "It is," Marcus agreed. "Are you happy?" Marcus considered the question. Happy was a complicated word, loaded with expectations and implications. But standing here, in this moment, with this child beside him, and a family inside that had somehow become his family too, yes, he was something close to happy, closer than he'd been in a very long time. "I think I am," he said. Eli nodded, satisfied with the answer. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the stars wheel overhead. "Marcus," Eli said eventually. "Yeah?" "Do you think my mom and dad can see me, from wherever they are?" Marcus thought about all the things he could say, the theological arguments, the scientific impossibilities, the comfortable platitudes people offered when confronted with questions about death and whatever came after. But none of those seemed right for this moment, for this boy. "I think," he said slowly, "that the people we love never really leave us. They're part of who we are, our memories, our choices, the way we treat others. Every time you're kind to someone, every time you choose compassion over cruelty, a little bit of them is there, guiding you." He looked down at Eli. "So maybe they can't see you in the way you're thinking, but they're with you." "They're always with you." Eli was quiet for a moment, processing this. Then he nodded, a small smile crossing his face. "I like that. That feels true." "Good." The boy reached out and slipped his hand into Marcus's. The gesture was simple, trusting, the act of a child who had finally found solid ground after years of shifting sand. Marcus squeezed his hand gently. "Merry Christmas, Eli." "Merry Christmas, Marcus." They stood together as the last light of Christmas Day faded into night, two broken people who had found in each other something worth rebuilding. The months that followed brought changes that none of them could have anticipated. In February, Linda and Dennis finalized Eli's adoption. The ceremony was small, just family and a few close friends. But to Eli, it felt like the whole world was watching. He wore a suit that Marcus had helped him pick out, his hair combed neatly for once, his smile so wide it seemed to transform his entire face. When the judge made the announcement official, declaring Eli a permanent member of the Johnson family, the courtroom erupted in applause. Linda was crying. She seemed to always be crying these days, happy tears that flowed freely and without shame. Dennis shook hands with everyone within reach, his chest puffed with pride. And Kyle, who had driven down from his father's house specifically for the occasion, stood in the back row, applauding with genuine enthusiasm. Marcus watched it all from his seat near the aisle. When Eli's eyes found his in the crowd, the boy gave him a thumbs up, their signal, developed over months of training sessions, meaning mission accomplished. Marcus returned the gesture, his heart fuller than he would have thought possible. In April, Marcus received an unexpected phone call. It was from his former commanding officer, Admiral Patricia Chen, who had retired herself several years earlier and now served on the board of a non-profit organization dedicated to supporting military veterans and their families. "Cole," she said without preamble, "I have a proposal for you." The non-profit, it turned out, was launching a new initiative, a mentorship program pairing retired service members with at-risk youth. They were looking for experienced leaders to help develop the curriculum and train the mentors. "We need people who understand both sides of the equation," Admiral Chen explained. "People who've served, who know the unique challenges of transitioning to civilian life, but who also understand young people. From what I've heard through the grapevine, you've become quite the expert in that area." Marcus was silent for a long moment. "Where did you hear that?" "I have my sources." There was a smile in her voice. "So what do you say, Cole? Are you ready to put that tactical mind of yours to work on a new mission?" Marcus thought about Eli. He thought about Kyle. He thought about all the other children out there who were hurting, who needed someone to believe in them, to fight for them. "Yes," he said, "I'm ready." The program launched in September, with Marcus serving as its director of curriculum development. He threw himself into the work with an intensity he hadn't felt since his SEAL days, channeling decades of leadership experience into creating frameworks for meaningful mentorship. The first cohort of mentors, all veterans, all searching for purpose in their post-service lives, completed their training in November. Eli insisted on being present for the graduation ceremony. He sat in the front row, clutching the framed photograph of his parents that had started everything, watching as Marcus presented certificates to each graduate. "These people are heroes," Eli whispered to Linda, who sat beside him. "Just like Marcus." "They are," Linda agreed, "and so are you for helping him find his way to this." As Marcus stood at the podium, looking out at the faces before him, faces marked by service and sacrifice, now ready to offer their strength to the next generation, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Belonging, purpose, home. Later that evening, after the ceremony had ended and the guests had departed, Marcus found Eli waiting for him in the empty auditorium. The boy was 11 now, taller than when they'd first met, his features beginning to hint at the young man he would become. "That was amazing," Eli said. "You're changing lives, Marcus. You know that, right? All those kids who are going to have mentors because of you, you're changing everything for them." Marcus sat down beside him, his joints protesting after a long day on his feet. "Maybe, but it started with you. If you hadn't been crying in that backyard, if I hadn't stopped to listen, none of this would have happened." Eli considered this. "So we changed each other." "I suppose we did." The boy smiled, that bright, unguarded smile that Marcus had come to treasure. "Good. I'm glad. You deserve to be changed." They sat together in the quiet auditorium, the same way they'd sat together that Christmas night, looking at the stars. But this time, Instead of looking up, they looked forward, toward a future neither could have imagined just a few years before. "Marcus," Eli said. "Yeah?" "I love you. You know that, right? Like family, like a grandfather or something." Marcus felt his eyes sting with unexpected tears. In all his years, through all his missions and commendations and hard-won victories, no one had ever said those words to him with such simple, unshakable certainty. "I love you too, Eli," he said, his voice rough. "Like family, like the grandson I never had." Eli leaned against him, a warm weight at his side. "Good, that feels true." And it was the truest thing either of them had ever known. The years that followed wrote themselves in moments both ordinary and extraordinary. Marcus watched Eli grow from a wounded 9-year-old into a confident teenager, then into a young man with dreams of his own. The photograph of his parents remained in its place of honor on Eli's desk, a constant reminder of where he came from and who he was. Kyle completed his therapy, repaired his relationship with his mother, and eventually became one of the first volunteers in Marcus's mentorship program. He had a gift for reaching troubled boys, probably because he'd been one himself, and his success stories became the stuff of program legend. Linda and Dennis hosted Thanksgiving dinner every year, their table expanding to accommodate an ever-growing family of blood and choice. Marcus had his own chair, placed between Eli and whatever mentee he'd brought along that year. And the mentorship program grew beyond anyone's expectations. What had started as a small non-profit initiative became a national model, replicated in cities across the country. By the time Marcus retired, again, this time for good, the program had served over 50,000 at-risk youth. His legacy, he realized, wasn't measured in missions completed or enemies defeated. It was measured in lives changed, hearts healed, broken things made whole. On his 75th birthday, Eli, now Dr. Elijah Torres, a child psychologist specializing in trauma and attachment, threw him a party. The guest list read like a who's who of people whose lives Marcus had touched. Former mentees, now grown with families of their own, fellow veterans who had found purpose through the program, children and grandchildren of the Johnson family that had adopted him as one of their own. When it came time for speeches, Eli stood at the head of the table, a glass of champagne in his hand and tears in his eyes. "Most of you know the story of how Marcus and I met," he began. "I was a broken kid with a ripped photograph and too much pain for my small body to hold. He was a broken man with an empty house and too many memories to bear alone. We found each other by accident or by fate, depending on how you look at it, and somehow, against all odds, we helped each other heal." He paused, looking at Marcus with an expression of such love and gratitude that it made Marcus's chest ache. "Marcus taught me that you always try, even when things seem hopeless, even when the damage looks too great to repair. You always try. That lesson changed my life. It shaped who I am, what I do, how I treat every child who walks into my office looking for help." Eli raised his glass. "To Marcus Cole, neighbor, mentor, father figure, hero. Thank you for hearing a crying kid in a backyard and deciding to help. Thank you for never giving up on any of us. Thank you for showing us what it means to truly love." The room echoed with voices raised in toast. Marcus sat at the center of it all, surrounded by the family he had built one connection at a time, and felt the kind of peace that he had spent a lifetime searching for. Later, when the party had wound down and most of the guests had gone home, Eli found Marcus on the back porch, the same porch where he'd first stood, watching a wounded boy try to piece together his shattered past. "You okay?" Eli asked, settling into the chair beside him. "More than okay," Marcus said. I'm grateful, Eli, for all of it, for you, for everything that came after." Eli smiled. "Me too." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, wrapped package. "I have one more gift for you. I wanted to give it to you in private." Marcus took the package and unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a photograph, not old and faded, but new and bright. It showed Marcus and Eli standing together at the mentorship program's 10-year anniversary celebration, their arms around each other's shoulders, both of them grinning at the camera with unguarded joy. Beneath the image, in Eli's neat handwriting, were the words, "Family isn't about blood. It's about who shows up. Thank you for showing up. Your grandson, Eli." Marcus stared at the photograph for a long moment, his vision blurring with tears he didn't try to hide. Then he pulled Eli into a fierce embrace, holding tight to this man who had once been a broken boy, this son who had once been a stranger crying in a backyard. "Thank you," Marcus whispered, "for letting me in, for giving me a reason to keep going." "Thank you for not walking away," Eli replied, "for seeing me when nobody else did." They held each other as the stars came out, the same stars that had witnessed their first conversation all those years ago, and in that moment, everything that had ever been broken between them, every wound, every fear, every moment of doubt, was finally, completely whole. This story proves that sometimes the greatest battles aren't fought on distant shores or hostile territories. Sometimes they're fought in backyards and living rooms, with listening ears and open hearts. A torn photograph became a bridge between two wounded souls. A moment of attention became a lifetime of purpose. Marcus Cole spent 22 years learning how to be a warrior, but it took a 9-year-old boy named Eli to teach him how to be a healer. And that, in the end, made all the difference.